From developing AI drones to missile-carrying submarines, it's no secret that Taiwan is on a mission to modernize its military. But its defense plans are moving beyond just weapons. As threats from China grow, the island wants its people to be ready for war. As the country launches a months-long series of exercises simulating national emergencies, we take a look at the so-called whole-of-society resilience plan. It's about empowering the people. But can Taiwan get its 23 million citizens on board? Also on the show, shaping the narrative. Taiwan marks VE Day for the first time. We look at how President Lai Ching-te used the event to target China. Plus, the opposition compares President Lai to Hitler, triggering widespread condemnation. So why did it double down on the slur? Hello and welcome. I'm Louise Watt, and this is Correspondents, where we talk about the news and what's going on behind the news with reporters around the region. Today, I'm joined by two Taipei-based journalists, Yimou Lee, a senior correspondent for Reuters, and freelance journalist Chris Horton. Thank you both for joining me on Correspondents. Soon after President Lai Ching-te came to power in May 2024, he created a social resilience committee. It's to better prepare Taiwan for natural disasters, but also a blockade or invasion by China. Now we're seeing various exercises across the country under the banner of whole-of-society defense resilience, involving government officials, volunteer firefighters, police officers, and civilians. Yimou, the threat of a Chinese invasion has been around for decades. Why is the government focusing now on preparing civilians for a possible war?
To me, that's actually a very clever move by the Taiwan government. To me, it's about public messaging. First, to the international society, especially to Taiwan's friendly allies, US, Japan, EU, some EU countries, Western democracies, and also to Taiwanese people, to the domestic audience at home. I think internationally, this is to tell the world that Taiwan is prepared. We are not just buying weapons. We are also making all possible efforts to make ourselves ready and to make it so difficult for China to attack Taiwan that they will think maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, and they hope that China could keep delaying it. And secondly, for the domestic audience, this is also to make everyone ready, not just for a possible war, right? It's also for the constant threats that Taiwanese people face every day. Typhoons, earthquakes, and you can never be prepared enough for those. And any measure to boost that effort, that preparedness, I think is welcomed.
This new whole-of-society resilience idea is very much associated with President Lai. Why is he doing it, but his predecessor, Tsai Ing-wen, who was in power for 8 years, didn't?
I think the job that Tsai had was to reassure the world and Taiwanese voters that the DPP was a responsible party and was not going to rock the boat or, quote unquote, provoke China. So
the Democratic Progressive Party, right, which is seen internationally as the more independence-leaning party of the two main parties in Taiwan.
They're more pro-sovereignty and they're pro-status quo, I would say. In order to get through 8 years with both control of the executive and legislative branches, you can't make drastic moves. And what she did was portray herself and her party as a steady pair of hands. And that basically helped the DPP stay in power. Lai, by the time he was elected and by the time he took office, he was facing a very different situation than Tsai did when she came into office. And right away, Beijing conducted large-scale joint military exercises around Taiwan. So in effect, Beijing really helped that kind of vibe shift that's happened in the transition from Tsai to Lai.
A turning point to me, which was in December last year, China staged these massive Navy activities around the first island chain, near Japan, near Taiwan, near the Philippines, in the South China Sea, in the Taiwan Strait. And to many security experts and diplomats and officials, this is basically China trying to practice a blockade of Taiwan and to prevent allies from sending in help. And I think that raised the alarm bell for some. And it's a moment when policymakers think, yes, we really need to also get other levels in the society ready.
Well, let's dig into these exercises a little. Yimou, what are they and how are they meant to get society ready for a possible war?
In short, it's to have every person and every company ready to deal with emergencies, not just war, also natural disasters. On the personal level, for example, how do you prepare a so-called grab bag at home, right? Basically just a bag that, okay, the ground is shaking, this is a massive earthquake. I can just grab it and then run to a shelter.
And it has money in, it might have your identity documents, some food, water.
A radio, battery, yeah, food, water that can supply you, keep you alive for 3 days. That's one example. Where do you find a bomb shelter that's closest to your home? How do you get there? Where are the parks that possibly have emergency water supply and food supply stored? Because, for example, in Taipei, major parks have that. And also, on the company level, how do you keep your business running? Because look at Ukraine, the war is now more than 3 years. The economy doesn't stop, right? And the one important lesson Taiwan is learning from Ukraine is how to keep your economy running. The Taiwanese government is trying to bridge some of the Taiwan companies with their counterparts in Ukraine and really to study, okay, how do we make that happen?
And Chris, you've been to at least one of these exercises and you've observed what was going on. What did you notice that left an impression on you?
Well, I mean, it was an impressive first effort. It was in New Taipei City at a high school, and an explosion, a fake explosion, had been staged, and then wounded emerged from that, and they were treated and triaged. Basically volunteers were deciding who couldn't be saved, who might be able to be saved, and who could definitely be saved. And it was good to see people actually thinking about that and really kind of visualizing the realities that they might have to deal with. But also there were a lot of old people that were dressed up as they were all bloodied up, fake blood.
The walking wounded.
Yes, the walking wounded. And, a lot of them were kind of smiling and laughing while they were doing it, and I think the seriousness of the situation that Taiwan is in right now it hasn't really set in as much as maybe it should. As everyone knows, China has been threatening to invade Taiwan for 7 decades, and I think if you're constantly living under that and it never happens, it's hard to take it seriously. But China's military, has never really been up to the task until recently, and that's a reality that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. And I think also, society, it's very easy to focus on your day-to-day life. And I think the same thing happened in Ukraine. Nobody was expecting to be invaded again 3 years ago, and when it happened, it was a huge wake-up call, obviously for Ukrainians, but for Taiwanese people too. But still, the sense of urgency, I think, isn't quite there yet, and that's what the Lai administration appears to be working on.
I mean, that's a very good point, isn't it? For something like this to work, society has to be on board. Yimou, what's your sense of this? Are they preoccupied with other issues?
I think it really depends on who you ask. And in short, yes, Taiwan is still divided on the issue. For some people, yes, this is still a distant threat. As Chris pointed out, the threat has been around 7 decades. it's not going to happen, maybe not tomorrow. But for some others, yes, it becomes a much more real threat now. And we are now seeing more and more civil groups, NGOs, that are involved in these efforts, basically training people on how to do first aid, for example. Some are even trying to teach you how to use offline map to find shelters or to find a safe place, right, in case of a war scenario when there's no internet. And I think the bottom line really is for the government how to really get everyone on board. And I think the answer is, again, disaster preparation, right? No matter, people might disagree on whether a war could happen tomorrow, but everyone can agree, right? This is Taiwan. There could be a typhoon or an earthquake anytime.
And these exercises, they're more than training civilians in first aid. They're also about things like digital resilience, so developing an emergency communications network in case of network attacks, and protecting critical infrastructure, particularly the power supply. Modern warfare is going beyond the traditional military warfare. Chris, what's your sense of how big a part of Taiwan's defense and deterrence strategy is this whole of society resilience?
Well, I think it's definitely a big part. If you're looking to invade a country and everybody's prepared to resist, that makes your job much more difficult. I would say the limitations that Taiwan is facing is definitely in terms of arming its citizens, and Taiwanese law gets in the way of training civilians in terms of how to use guns, and also obviously in terms of the distribution of guns. If you look at like Finland or other European states that are preparing for possible Russian invasion, they have societies who are much more familiar with firearms, and that's a conversation that Taiwan needs to have at some point. I believe Robert Tsao was initially, billionaire Robert Tsao.
Yeah, so he's a very rich businessman who's poured a lot of money into helping get Taiwanese society ready. He's sponsoring some civil defense groups.
Yes, the Kuma Academy and other initiatives. But one of the things he wanted to do initially was to train Taiwanese people, especially sharpshooters and snipers, and Taiwanese law got in the way of that.
Taiwan's military is dwarfed by the Chinese military. It's dwarfed in terms of the number of troops, the number of vessels and fighter jets and so forth. So while President Lai promotes the whole of society resilience, he still has to keep trying to get Taiwan's military ready. And he's pledged to raise defense spending to more than 3% of GDP. But that needs legislative approval, and the opposition has the power to put a spanner in the works there. Yimou, how likely is it that he can get this budget increase passed?
This is a really tough question. So we're talking about the special defense budget that is likely to be proposed to the parliament by the cabinet in the September session, right? But okay, the bottom line is all three parties, the DPP, the ruling party, and the two other opposition parties, the KMT and the smaller party, the Taiwan People Party, basically saying they all support boosting Taiwan's defense. That's the party line for everyone. But now we are also expecting these recall votes that could happen around August, September, also around the same time. And it's still a huge question mark to me. What will happen to the make-up in the parliament after the votes?
Yes, because the recall votes, these are campaigns to recall elected legislators. So that could change the makeup of the legislature, as you're saying, and it could no longer possibly be dominated by the opposition.
Exactly, but that's just one of the many possibilities, right? It's just hard to say when we have a new parliament, what is likely to be passed or what is likely to be blocked.
Let's take a quick break. You're watching Correspondents on TaiwanPlus. Next up, for the first time, Taiwan has marked the end of World War II, not in Asia, but in Europe. We discuss why, and we'll also see what's on our guests' reporters' notebooks. Stay tuned.
Thank you for sharing our passion for food and Taiwan. Veggie Island explores the vibrant world of plant-based cuisine.
Wow, this is amazing.
While Taiwan on the Rocks uncovers the stories and craftsmanship behind every sip.
Have you ever tried Taiwanese beer?
Are you ready to taste even more of Taiwan?
Welcome back. You're watching Correspondents. I'm Louise Watt. This month saw the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe. And Taiwan marked that anniversary for the very first time. Why? Well, we'll get into that. Let's quickly dig into Taiwan's complicated history when it comes to World War II. At the time, it was a Japanese colony, and Taiwanese fought alongside Japanese forces. After the war and Japan's surrender in 1945, the Allies gave control of Taiwan to China, to the Republic of China, or ROC, not the Communist People's Republic of China. That wasn't established until 1949, when ROC forces retreated to Taiwan. So the Republic of China fought alongside the Allies, but Taiwan, then a Japanese colony, fought on the opposing side. Yimou, you broke the story that Taiwan was going to mark Victory in Europe Day for the first time. How and why did Taiwan mark this anniversary?
This is actually pretty unusual. Lai is the first Taiwan president to mark this anniversary for the end of the war in Europe. By doing this, Lai took this opportunity to urge democracies, allies to unite to face the threats of authoritarian regimes, including, obviously, China. And also, to Taiwan, this is an opportunity to tell the world that, hey, wait a moment, we have been hearing the Chinese narrative of the war, but actually what we think really happened is this. So there's also these fascinating competing narratives between Beijing and Taipei that's going on.
Well, let's have a listen to part of his speech on VE Day.
台湾与欧洲正共同面对新集权集团的威胁，我们正共同经历攸关通讯与网络安全，铺设数十年的海底电缆会遭到刻意的破坏。我们正共同经历攸关民主健全发展的选举会受到各种境外错假资讯的干扰，在我们的社会制造刻意的对立。
As Lai was giving his speech, Chinese President Xi Jinping was in Moscow to attend a military parade also marking the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany. Chinese troops took part in that parade. In an article published under Xi's name in an official Russian newspaper, he wrote, "During the World Anti-Fascist War, the Chinese and Russian peoples fought shoulder to shoulder and supported each other. The two countries served as the mainstay of resistance against Japanese militarism and German Nazism." So, Chris, we have these competing narratives. Are either of them getting traction around the world?
It's hard to say. You have China, you have Xi Jinping and China distorting history, basically saying that we were the China that won, but it was the ROC. You have Lai Ching-te, kind of taking that ROC mantle, and while Taiwan might have been on the losing end of World War II, the ROC was on the winning end, and highlighting the ROC's connection to the war and the victory in Europe, and also highlighting Taiwan's plight today, in terms of the unofficial China and Russia alliance that's threatening Europe. It sends a message to Europe like, hey, we're dealing with the same thing here. let's work together. I think it's smart messaging.
At the same time that China and Taiwan were marking VE Day, Taiwan's main opposition, the Kuomintang or KMT, came out and unexpectedly compared President Lai to the leader of Nazi Germany. This is what KMT chair Eric Zhu said on the eve of VE Day.
今天赖清德，你对在野党的所作所为，你要记住，你就是在做希特勒做的事情。
Taiwan's de facto German and Israeli embassies condemned the analogy. The German office called on the KMT leadership to refrain from invoking inappropriate and historically insensitive comparisons in domestic political discourse. The Israeli office said, "We reject all forms of trivialization of the Holocaust. Such comparisons are deeply offensive to the memory of 6 million Jewish people who suffered and perished." Chris, why is the KMT throwing out this accusation now?
Well, it's not really the KMT, it's Eric Zhu, right? And he's the chairman who, there's going to be a new election in the coming weeks for the chair of the party, and he's facing a potential challenge to his rule of the party. And so in my opinion, this feels like he's just trying to rally the base, right? And there's no way he would be saying this thinking that the Germans and Israelis wouldn't be offended and wouldn't issue statements. Of course they would. As soon as they did, he was right back in front of reporters saying, "Stay out of our internal affairs." I mean, he was not caught off guard by that. He was ready. So I think this was a very calculated, if a bit cynical, way to rally his base.
Because his point is that he says that the Lai and the DPP are silencing opposition voices, partly for the recall campaign that we mentioned earlier.
But it's interesting that he's saying that because if this is a dictatorship and if they are being silenced, it's interesting that the KMT with Eric Zhu being the main speaker had a massive rally, in front of the presidential office, just shortly before he issued those statements.
So Yimou, this analogy to Adolf Hitler, how surprising is this kind of political discourse in Taiwan?
It's surprising for some and also unsurprising for others. So for the surprising part, okay, look at the international indicators, right? The polls, the researchers. Taiwan is still among the top democracies, if not in the world, in the region. Look at media freedom, for example.
So it's number one in Asia as far as media freedoms go, according to Reporters Without Borders.
Yeah. And also look at the president's approval rate. Now we are near his 1 year in office, right? And now we are looking at Taiwanese opinion polls with there are different polls, right? But his approval rate is somewhere between 40 to 45%, some lower, some higher. I don't know if, for Chris, for you, if that approval rate constitutes dictatorship for you.
My definition of dictatorship is definitely different from what I see in Taiwanese society today. But also, I mean, that approval rate is, I mean, usually Taiwanese voters sour on every president after 1 year, and that's actually quite high for Taiwanese voters. So it suggests that people don't, if there is a dictatorship, which there's not, no one's really feeling it.
I'd also like to point out the unsurprising part to me. There are some reports out there from really good independent NGOs. They have noticed that starting from last year, the Chinese official media actually started a campaign basically painting the Lai government Nazis. The narrative was already out there. So maybe there are some members in the Taiwan society pick them up without knowing it. I don't know if that's the case with the KMT or Chairman Zhu, but it's not groundbreaking.
And there has been increasing similarities between the rhetoric you're hearing out of Beijing and out of Eric Zhu and the rest of the KMT with regard to the Lai government, calling it a dictatorship.
Before we go, let's find out what else you're both working on at the moment. Yimou, what's on your reporter's notebook?
A reporter never tells you what's in a notebook, but I can tell you, I think for a lot of reporters in town, the next major focus would be the annual Hangguan military drill that started in early July, and for the first time, it will last for 10 days.
Mm-hmm. So this is Taiwan's biggest drill of the year.
And this year will be the longest. So we will be looking at what kind of drills are the defense ministry doing, what kind of weapons are they showcasing, and most importantly, what are the likely Chinese reactions? And
Chris, if you can share, what's on your reporter's notebook?
I would say the thing that I'm finding most interesting right now is the kind of changing dynamic between Taiwan and Japan and Taiwan and the Philippines. Now that Manila and Tokyo are starting to realize that the threat to Taiwan is very real, and these countries have territory that's just as close to Taiwan as China is, you know, they're starting to realize maybe we need to coordinate and liaise a bit more with Taiwan than we have in the past.
Thank you, Chris Horton, Yimou Lee, for joining me today. I'm Louise Watt, and this has been Correspondents. If you're watching us on YouTube, do subscribe to the Correspondents playlist to see all our episodes. Thanks for joining us.